When you go see a therapist, you're not going there for the answers. You're going there for the questions. You've got the answers inside. What three things can you do today that will not just change your life, but everyone around you? Take out your cards and start writing them down. These are quotes by Robert Rodriguez from various talks and interviews that he's given. And these are talks that I've been sitting with for a while, putting this together. We're going to talk about how Robert Rodriguez thinks, how he writes, the tools he uses, and why he believes you can change your life with a pen, some cards, and the decision to start before you're ready. By the end of this, you'll see how one person turned his limits into a system that works for just about everything. And what fascinates me about Robert Rodriguez is, and there are many things, but one is where he started. Now, he comes from a family of 10 kids, and he didn't grow up in the movie capital of the world, Los Angeles. He grew up in San Antonio, and he didn't go to film school. He had no connections, no money. In fact, he donated himself to medical research just to make a few dollars. And despite not having any of that, he figured it out from the ground up. And the simple method he built ended up working for just about everything in his life: screenwriting, business, parenting, health. Now, let me tell you why I'm profiling film directors and their methods up front. A lot of these film directors, they rely on writing to gather ideas, to gather their thoughts. These filmmakers are writers. That's the general thread of this, of Modernote, where you're watching and listening to right now. Writing and how writing changes things. All right, let's get into Robert Rodriguez. Before he became a filmmaker, he was a cartoonist. He had a daily comic strip. Every single day, he had to come up with a joke, a drawing, and a story. And there was a deadline. If he missed it, he didn't get paid. He was around 19 years old when he already had 2 jobs, and he really needed the money. Now, doing daily cartoon work took Robert hours. He wanted to create a more efficient way to work, so he did something he called the sofa method. This is how it goes. When he got home, he would lie down on his couch, and with his hands behind his head, he would try to picture the comic strip in his mind. What he figured was, if I can see the whole thing clearly before I sit down to draw, I'll be faster. I'll know exactly what to do when I pick up the pen. So he would lie there for hours. Nothing would happen. Then as soon as you know it, the deadline would get close and he would start to panic. So finally he would sit up, pick up the pen, and start drawing. The second he picked up the pen, this is important, ideas would flood in. He would get 3, maybe 4 or 5 ideas all at once. He learned that ideas don't show up while you're sitting or laying down and waiting for them. They show up when you start to work. Robert believes that real creativity needs you to pick up the pen before it can take over. Here's what he says. It's like a spirit that's been assigned to you. It wants to help, but it won't help you until you give it something to work with. The second your hands start moving, it takes over. Now, this is exactly, it reminds me of Steven Pressfield, and he talks about something similar to this in his book, The War of Art. Steven calls it the muse, and he says that the muse shows up and helps you. She brings the ideas, the inspiration, and the breakthroughs. But the catch is that she only comes to professionals. Steven calls anybody who shows up every day, no matter what, a professional. Whether you're sick or tired or uninspired, it doesn't matter. You do the work anyway. Now, on the flip side, if you treat your work like a hobby or get distracted or simply procrastinate, the muse ignores you. She'll help you only if you show up every day and do the work regardless of how you feel. Pressfield calls procrastination, laziness, lack of motivation, he calls this the resistance. So the lesson is pretty simple here, But think about how many things you and I have been sitting with, waiting to feel ready before we start, right? Till we have it all figured out. Unfortunately, that's not how it works, and I'm just as guilty of this. For example, not getting started till I'm ready, whatever that means. Spending money on the best tool, that gets you nowhere. So Pressfield also says the professional expects resistance. The resistance comes every single day, and the professional fights through it anyway. All right, back to Robert. By the early 90s, he had his sights on making movies. He had no money for film school, no equipment, no crew. What he had was the method from his comic strip days and the willingness to start before he was ready. But here's a piece of his process that doesn't get talked about enough. He started with what he had, and then he worked backwards from there. So he sat down with a legal pad and he wrote out everything he could access for free. So for example, the actors, the set, anything. Robert had a friend, his name was Carlos, who lived in a small Mexican town. And Carlos's cousin owned a bar and a ranch. His brother-in-law had a school bus. He also had a pit bull. And somehow there was a turtle in the mix. Now his friend Carlos agreed to be an actor, the star of the movie. He was the easiest person to cast, and the town in Mexico was a free location. Robert wrote all of this down, and then he asked, how can I use all of this? What story could I tell? He says that most of us approach creative work the wrong way. We imagine all the things that we want, everything that we feel, but then we stop because we just don't have the resources. Now, to me, this was a total slap in the face in a good way. Now, this is a good exercise because Robert flipped all of his excuses upside down. He looked at the things that he had, everything he had available, and the little bit of money he had saved. And those constraints were what fueled him to create something really special. One time, Robert explained this in a talk after El Mariachi was a success. And Kevin Smith was in the crowd, and Kevin Smith is another filmmaker. Smith said it changed everything for him. He went home and made a list of what he had: a convenience store, a video rental place, and friends who could act. And that's how he filmed Clerks. Okay, so Robert had a list of assets, and now we're going to talk about his index cards. He has this method, this writing method, by using index cards. All right, he started asking himself questions. What if there's a guitar player who walks into a bar looking for work, and they say no, they already have music covered? And then a man with a guitar case full of weapons walks in and shoots up the place. He's hunting for the man who owns the bar. All right, so he puts those cards down. Now he'll ask, what goes before this? Who's this guy? Card by card, question by question, the story builds itself. The mariachi needs a tragic past. Now this is something he learned while he was learning how to storytell. Every road warrior has a tragic past, and his character is going to meet a woman, and she's going to help him, but unfortunately she's also going to die. He said the whole thing wrote itself fast because he wasn't trying to write it. He was just answering questions. He shot the movie for $7,000, and he had to shoot everything in one take. Now, there's a reason why. And that reason is because anything else would double the budget. He also shot it in Spanish, and Robert didn't speak Spanish. He wrote the dialogue in English, and the actors translated it to Spanish on set. Robert kept that part secret for a long time because he figured that people wouldn't believe that he made the movie alone, and they definitely would not believe that he made it in Spanish without speaking Spanish. Now, Robert's original plan was to sell the movie directly to the Spanish home video market, which was a big thing back in the 90s. Low budget, direct to VHS or DVD movies. To Robert, selling it for $20,000 to this market would be a big win. But the sell fell through. He went home for Christmas that year thinking he'd failed. And I think this next part is important. Robert Rodriguez journals. He says that he writes about his day in detail and logs what happened, for example, who he talked to, how he felt. And that night he wrote, and I quote, "I'm really bummed. I walked home penniless. Merry Christmas. I feel like a freaking loser." He didn't know how much that entry would matter. He was just writing down what happened and how he felt. Now, let's go back a little bit. And Robert had already sent the film. He finished the Mariachi. He sent it around before Christmas. Him feeling like a failure was specific to not being able to sell it to the Spanish home video market. Before that, he had already traveled to Los Angeles to pitch the movie before it was made. He cut a trailer about El Mariachi and pitched it all over LA, all over town. He didn't even start the movie. During those networking adventures in Los Angeles, Robert Rodriguez met with Robert Newman. Newman was a talent agent at ICM, and Newman liked Rodriguez. And after Newman saw the trailer, he was eager to watch the movie. So Rodriguez mailed the finished movie to Newman, and while Rodriguez was home feeling like a failure, Newman had already seen the tape. All right, so we fast forward a month later, and Robert Newman offered to represent Rodriguez. 2 months after that, Robert Rodriguez sold El Mariachi for 10 times what he'd originally asked. This reminds me of a visual that I keep coming back to. Now, if you're watching this, you could see it on the screen. But if you're listening, look up Jack Butcher, This Is Pointless. And what you're looking at here is essentially a graph where it seems like nothing is happening for a very, very long time. And you get to a point where you're literally thinking, this is pointless. Why am I doing this? No one's watching. No one's listening. I'm laughing because it's kind of how I feel right now. But that's how it goes. But then you're so close when things begin to take off. So, all right, the lesson here is keep going. Keep doing it. If you really believe in what you're doing, keep doing it. You might have some setbacks. They happen. But the best thing we could do is to keep going. All right, moving on. So Robert believed in what he made. Sure, he felt like a failure, but he put in the hustle and distribution beforehand. After El Mariachi, then came Desperado, From Dusk Till Dawn, 4 Rooms, and he wrote his book, Rebel Without a Crew. And that's part of what I studied here to put this together. But he did all of this within 4 months, which is crazy. He knows exactly how fast it happened because he kept record, back to journaling. That Christmas entry was dated. So he went back to look for resources to record the audio version of Rebel Without a Crew, which he hadn't done before until just recently. I think about 1 or 2 years ago. And the journal showed him that exact timeline. And it was weeks from $0, from penniless, all the way up to the new kid, the new hot thing in Hollywood. It happened in weeks. So it was good for him to go back because he'd forgotten most of the details. The dates in his journal showed exactly how fast it all happened. There's only so much you could learn from a book. You have to get up and do the thing. You have to get up and literally roll with the punches. You've got to go out there, suffer a little bit of humiliation, but if you keep pushing through, you're gonna get somewhere, guaranteed. And this goes back to Stephen Pressfield and The Muse and The Professional and The Resistance. The Professional shows up all the time, keeps getting back up, dusting themselves off and going at it. The Muse shows up for The Professional and essentially says, I'm here to serve whatever purpose you're trying to serve. And The Resistance is that nagging setback or that nagging thing that tries to, stop you. Procrastination, feeling lazy, etc. Now here's something that made El Mariachi possible, that made it a big success, that made it a breakthrough for Robert. And Robert talks about it openly. Now think about it. He almost knew nothing about filmmaking. He was teaching himself, sure, and he learned about the basics, equipment. You got to shoot a movie. You have to have a story, but he didn't know about, for example, syncing sound. He didn't know about scoring music or putting music in the background, and he didn't know that you could take multiple takes. He always solved each problem in front of him, and those solutions became the style that made mariachi interesting and different. And so years later, people would come to him and say, how did you make the movie for $7,000? That's impossible. And he would think, really? It didn't seem that hard. I just followed my nose and ended up at the top of the mountain. He says the things that look impossible from the outside are just solutions stacked on top of each other. You don't need to see the whole path. You need to take the next step, one step at a time. And the danger is knowing too much, so much that you talk yourself out of it before you even start. He loves being naive about things because if you know so much and the moment you start thinking about the ways things won't work because you simply know so much about that thing, you stop yourself from looking for other ways of doing it, for other solutions. Think about that. What things have you not done because you're thinking, oh, I don't have the resources, I don't have the money, I don't have the team. We constantly convince ourselves that we're not ready yet. And what Robert says is that's a trap. The person with less experience is willing to go for it and make the thing. On the other hand, the expert makes the case for why it's too much, it's too complicated, we don't have enough, we don't have anything. All excuses. All right, index cards. This is the thing that Robert uses in just about everything in his life, professionally, personally, anywhere. He started his index card system during his comic strip days. Now I'm going to explain how it works. So you take a small stack of index cards, you rubber band those together, and you carry them everywhere. You could carry them in a bag, carry them in your pocket. Whenever you have an idea, you could write that idea on the card. If you have a question, ask it on the index card. So for example, if you lay out the cards on a table, what you do is you look at whatever ideas you put together and you could write on the card right underneath your idea, ask, for example, what goes next? What would come before this? What would happen if? Or what's missing? Does it make sense? How can I make more sense of this? One idea per card, one question. You could move them around, shuffle them, see what's missing, and you begin developing a story or a vision of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Now, this reminds me how Robert Greene writes his books. If you're not familiar with Robert Greene, I highly, highly recommend you read any of his books. He's very well known for the 48 Laws of Power. I personally love his book, Mastery. They all came out of having a card system. He also uses index cards to write his books. Now, I'm not going to get into Robert's card method. That'll probably be in a future episode, but he has a card method that works for him. This goes back to writing. Physical writing helps us think better. And writing on cards and sorting them out, it helps activate our brains. I'm not an expert in this, but I could tell you firsthand, whenever I write something, I definitely retain it much better. If I write something on a card, I definitely remember. I typically use cards for things like quick notes or a to-do list. It works much better than if I were to type it in, punch it into a phone. Something to think about. Robert says that the key is the kind of questions that we ask ourselves. Most of us ask questions that work against us. So for example, here's a question. What 3 things could I start this week that would change my life and the lives of others around me? This is an example of the right question. It'll help stimulate more than one answer. So instead of one answer or 3 answers, you might get 15. So Robert says that when you write ideas on these cards, you get them out of your head into a physical space, you could see them and then you can move them around, which means creativity stops being this invisible thing you're waiting for and it becomes something you're doing with your hands. Robert loves index cards so much that he has given them to his kids for Christmas. And he would tell them, you could change your life with this thing. And his kids love them. He gives cards out at his talks. He'll hold up a pack and say, who wants to change their life? Everyone's hand goes up and he'll toss one in the crowd. A friend of his, DJ Catrone, caught a deck at a talk and then he went home and finished a script that he has been working on for a long time. It's been sitting there. He shut his phone for 3 days and wrote the whole thing. That movie just came out about a year ago in 2025 and it's called Fight or Flight. This card method works because it forces you to start. You're not staring at a blank page. You're answering a question and one answer leads to the next. Here's an idea from Robert that I keep thinking about. I don't work in film, but it changed how I see my own work. In 2002, he was in the middle of making a movie he was directing, writing, composing the score, editing, doing the cinematography, everything all at once. So he asked himself, how can I possibly do this? He didn't have, for example, proper training in scoring. So he did this. He literally went to Amazon.com and ordered every book with the word creativity in the title. He read through all of them. Now, one book in particular stopped him. It somehow matched his experience exactly. He flipped to another page and realized, wait, this is a book about painting, but it applied perfectly to everything he was doing. And that led him to a conclusion. Creativity is 90% of any creative job. The technical part, the formatting, the gear, the music theory, that's the other 10. And because creativity is the main thing, someone who genuinely understands how it works can move from one discipline to another discipline and do the real work in each one. Some of the best musicians don't even read or write music. It's not where the value is. Now, this matters to me and you because I think Robert's right. The creative part of what we do is the actual skill. We develop it the same way that Robert did, by asking better questions, by doing it over and over, putting in the repetitions. I talk about this over and over again, building that muscle. There's a principle that runs through everything Robert does, and he calls it freedom of limitations. When he made El Mariachi, he didn't have a crew, he didn't have a budget, he didn't have professional equipment, and he tells people, make a list of your assets, write it down, work that into the story, build around what's available to you right now. You and I have been taught that more resources equals more creative freedom, but I would argue that is not the case. Some of the best creative moments come when resources are limited, when we have constraints. He says that if you had to make a movie right now, in the room that you're sitting in, that constraint is actually a gift. You come up with a million ideas when the canvas is small. Barry Schwartz wrote a whole book about this, and it's called The Paradox of Choice. In a nutshell, the more options we have, the harder it is to choose and to move forward. We have infinite resources, infinite information, and we call it the internet. There is so much out there for free, but the problem is that a lot of it isn't curated. It doesn't guide you from point A to point Z. That's one of the things that I intend to do here on Modernote is to highlight the common thread between everyone we profile here. Constraints force decisions, and decisions create momentum. Robert built a full studio in Austin. He still has the 98,000 square foot set from his movie Alita, and he built it on steel support beams specifically so he could keep using it, so he still uses that set till this day. And that's the El Mariachi principle at scale. Don't throw anything away. Everything is an asset. He has this idea about labels. The words you use to describe yourself shape what you actually become. All right, this might sound a little too woo-woo for some of us, but please bear with me. In Rebel Without a Crew, he wrote, stop calling yourself an aspiring filmmaker. He says, don't aspire, just be. If you want to be a filmmaker, print business cards with your name and title, director, cinematographer, or if you're in another industry, owner and operator, CEO. Then what do you have to do? You have to conform to that identity. What does a filmmaker do? Filmmaker makes movies. What does an aspiring filmmaker do? They aspire. And that's it. The word you choose determines how you spend the rest of your days. So the message here for you and I is to start acting in ways that are consistent with our identity. Now, on the same topic of identity, Robert spent many years sitting for long hours at the drawing table, at the editing room. And at the time, he ran into Ricardo Montalban, who was 84 and in a wheelchair. And Robert said that Ricardo looked at him and said, Robert, I'm 84. What's your excuse? You have to work out. A year later, Robert worked with Sylvester Stallone, and he hated the idea of working out. So he asked him if he enjoyed going to the gym. And Stallone said, no, I'd rather rearrange my sock drawer than go work out. So here's what Stallone did. He told him to get a trainer. So Robert got a trainer, and he hated it. He was hiding from his trainer. He paid the trainer not to show up. He hated every single workout. But then he realized something. A friend of his was trying to quit smoking. Robert told his friend, no, you'll go back because your identity is a smoker. You have to say it out loud, I'm a non-smoker, and then conform to that new identity. What does a non-smoker do? Hates smoking, gets away from cigarettes. Clearly, this made Robert realize something. He was doing the same thing on himself. So he decided to change things. And he went from saying, I hate working out, to I'm an athlete. By the next day, everything changed. What does an athlete do? Make time to train, eats right, loves it. He changed the label first, and then he changed his habit. So this drives the point that if we're saying, I'm going to try to work out more, it doesn't work out that way. It's just a goal. That's not you being definitive and saying, I'm going to make this happen. It's saying, I'll try, maybe, right? That's why maybe never really works. Your label is your identity. You are that identity. So think about that label that you and I are carrying right now for our work, for our health, our career. The word that we're using to define ourselves is the one that helps us move forward towards that big thing, that big goal, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to become, accomplish. Some of us wait for inspiration before starting. We wait until we have a clear vision, until the timing feels right, until we're ready. I would consider changing that mindset as well. You probably heard the phrase ready, fire, aim. Don't spend months or years aiming, getting ready. Robert says that it's the wrong order. You fire first, then you aim, because you really can't see where to point until you're moving. Robert applies this frame of mind to everything. When someone tells him they have a project that's almost ready, that they just need a little more time, he says to them every time, he says something like, that's going to be our tombstone. Here lies so-and-so. He was never ready. The answers we need don't come while we're planning, while we're getting ready. They come while we're doing the work. And he connects this to life itself. Things come at us and we wind up having to figure that out. Just how John Lennon said, life happens to you when you're busy making other plans. So just jump in and start. And we'll figure it out day by day. To prove that he could create a film again with $7,000 even today, Robert did it as an experiment with his son, Racer. They worked together on the film Red 11, and every day on set, things were just not working as expected. An actor wouldn't show up, the script didn't match the location, and it got to a point when Racer kept asking, what do we do? And Robert kept telling him the same thing. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Robert said that by the end of 2 weeks, Racer was talking about the creative process as if he'd been doing it for a decade. Racer said to him, I never understand how you made it in Mariachi, but now I do, because we just did it. Learning by doing. All right, here's a related idea Robert picked up from watching someone else navigate through it. In the mid-90s, he was working with Steven Spielberg on a Zorro project. And this was a dream project for Robert. He was working with one of his film heroes. And at the time, Spielberg was getting a lot of criticism. So Robert watched this as it was happening and thought, if this is what happens when you get big, maybe I'll just stay small. Now here's something that stuck with me ever since I first heard Robert mention it. Robert went up to Spielberg and asked him directly, how do you keep going when people throw that much at you? And Spielberg said, oh, Robert, you just don't blink. I'm going to repeat that again. You just don't blink. So Robert carried that ever since. And he commits to making a body of work because you don't know if a project is going to connect or if it's not. So as an example, one of my favorite film directors, David Lynch, made Dune, the movie Dune in 1984. The movie was a massive, expensive failure, and it was one of the biggest of that decade. Lynch himself disowned it. But you and I don't think of Lynch as the guy who made Bad Dune. We think of him as the guy who made Eraserhead, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks. His body of work swallowed that failure. So you don't get defined by one flop. You just keep going. One time, Kevin Smith was talking to Robert, and Smith had written a script called Dogma. And he said to Robert, this is definitely a Robert Rodriguez film. You should direct it. But then Robert turned around and said, why don't you direct it? And then Smith told him, it's too big for me. So Robert said, now you have to make it. Fear forward. Do the thing that pulls you out of your wheelhouse. If you don't have any fear going into something today, you're probably just spinning your wheels. Kevin Smith wound up directing Dogma, and that movie transformed his career. So fear is the signal that you and I are doing something that matters. If you're scared, if you have butterflies in your stomach, maybe it's something good. Maybe you're onto something. Here's another piece of Robert's full life system. This is one that I think ties everything together. Every night at midnight, he has an alarm set that goes off, and it says journal. So it's on his phone. His alarm goes off. It says journal. So he sits down and writes about his day. So here's the exact method he uses. He writes in detailed what happened, who said what, and how it felt. And he created a phrase for this, which he calls living is reliving. And here's what he means. In that moment, you experience your life in full resolution. You see everything. You feel it. But a year from now, your brain will have a blurry memory of that. He calls our brains 3-pound meat computers. We're simply not built to store our lives with any fidelity. Just how Joan Didion wrote, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. She kept a journal her whole adult life. She said the act of writing was how she made sense of what was happening while it was happening. Now, Robert discovered the same thing from a completely different direction. He tells a story about trying to trace when he bought a certain guitar. So he did a word search. And I'm assuming he digitizes his journal, so let's assume he puts his journal entries on a computer or in a database. He did a word search, and it turned out that a $10,000 guitar that he thought he bought was actually a gift from someone else. He had zero memory of receiving it. And he tells another story about his mother's 75th birthday. She didn't want a celebration. She said nothing would top her 65th when the whole family got together and she got a car as a gift. Robert had no memory of that either. So he figured out he must have filmed it. And he found the tape. He sat down with her, put it on, and they watched it together. She cried, he cried, and he said that she got to relive the whole thing and appreciated it more the second time watching the footage. Now, here's an idea that I really love. When his kids were growing up, he filmed everything and kept journals of all of it. As they grew older, he showed them the footage. One of his sons watched himself on an old tape and leaned physically into the screen. So Robert asked what he was doing, and his son said, I left the living room. This is virtual reality to me. The moment's flying by, and chances are you and I won't remember it. But when we journal, we create something we could go back to. And when we go back, that's when things become meaningful. It's when we see the patterns, when we realize a failure was the seed of our biggest success. So he points to 4 Rooms, the movie 4 Rooms. Now, it bombed, and he felt bad about it. But when he went back through his notes from that period, he found 2 ideas buried in that failure. One became Spy Kids, and the other one of my favorite films, personally, Sin City. 2 of the biggest franchises came directly from a movie that most people would write off as a disaster. The keys to what comes next are already in what just happened. You could find them by keeping a record. I became a fan of Robert Rodriguez, not necessarily because of his films, but because of his teaching and open sharing of ideas. I love that. Here's a fun fact. His child actors, Alexa and Daryl, who were 8 and 7 at the time, didn't have stunt doubles. This is for Spy Kids. They were doing their own stunts, solving their own problems on set every day. And Robert watched these regular kids turn into confident, capable people over the span of those 3 films. He thought, I need to challenge my own kids like this. So he started to put his kids in his movies. He had them write scripts, compose music. As a result, his son Racer, who studied the piano since age 4, ended up scoring for We Can Be Heroes, which became the most watched movie in Netflix history at the time. Racer wrote his first piece of music without even seeing footage. Robert put it against the picture, and it fit a 5-minute sequence perfectly. So he calls his son back and said, good news and bad news. The good news is, this is incredible. The bad news is, I can't help you at all. I have no idea how you did this. Racer taught himself music theory by going to YouTube. Robert made him write the entire score, and they recorded it in Vienna with a full orchestra. At a point during the recording, the conductor stopped the session and said, this is a magnificent score. I can't believe you're 20. Robert taught his kids how to take on a problem they didn't know how to solve, how to start before they were ready, and how to figure it out day by day. He has a phrase for what he's trying to do, and it's don't just parent, partner. After a certain age, your kids don't need a parent. They need a mentor, someone they could build alongside with. You wind up building a relationship that lasts where you're on the same boat and figuring things out together. He told his kids after Red 11 that if I ever get hit by a bus, you all know what to do because they learned through doing. So there's a pattern. Here with the people that we're studying, different tools, but the same principle underneath. Each one built a physical system for thinking, something that you hold in your hands, something portable that forces you to engage with one idea at a time. Each and every person is protecting that process. For example, Coppola went to Cafe Triste with his Olivetti typewriter. Neil Young releases music without waiting for permission. And in this case, Rodriguez walks around with a pack of index cards. They all carve out space where they could work without any interference. Now, what stayed with me working on this episode is that Robert is someone who got clear early on about how creativity works and how to build simple habits around that understanding. The story builds one card at a time. All right, as we wrap up with Robert Rodriguez today, here are some key takeaways. Start before you're ready. Robert made El Mariachi without knowing if he could. He wrote scripts on index cards before anyone was going to buy them. He shot in a language that he didn't even speak. He jumped in and figured it out as he went. Write backwards from what you have. Don't imagine the ideal version of your project and feel stopped by what's missing. Make a list of what you do have. The people, the places, the tools, the time. Build that list. Constraints are not the obstacle. They're just a starting point. Ask better questions. The index card method works because it gives you a structure for asking one question at a time. For example, what's next? What's missing? What could you and I start this week? Our minds answer whatever question we give it. Change the label. Change the behavior. If you keep calling yourself an aspiring anything, you'll keep aspiring. Pick the identity you want. Say it out loud. Don't try to change your habits first. Change what you call yourself. The habits will follow. Fear forward. When something feels too big, that's a signal that you and I are on the right path. Don't blink. Commit to a body of work. Not one single masterpiece. You don't know which thing's going to hit big. The only move is to keep going. Now, lastly, journal. Write it down. Tonight, tomorrow, anytime. Your memory will erase most of what happened today. The only way to keep that memory is to put it on paper. Robert does it every night at midnight. He found two of the biggest creative breakthroughs buried in entries from a project that bombed. The keys to what's next are already in what just happened. Robert Rodriguez is in his early 60s now. He just launched Brass Knuckle Films, where fans can invest alongside him and bring the same spirit from El Mariachi into a new model for how independent film gets made. This is someone who built a creative system out of the simplest materials possible. He applied it to his life and to his career. He gave it to his kids and tosses them in crowds. He once said that you don't need permission to begin. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to know how it ends. You just need to start. And when you start, ideas you would have never found on your own show up because you finally gave them somewhere to go. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the success story, the method underneath it, and the fact that it fits in your pocket. So pick up the pen. The rest follows. Thank you for watching and listening. If you've come this far, please like and subscribe so more people could find this show. This is Modernote. My name's Caesar. We'll see you next time. Thanks.